How's it? That is South African slang for hello. Before we get to the building of the braai, here is a brief intro to braaiing and how it is an integral part of South African culture. Centuries ago, the Dutch colonized South Africa. And then the British colonized South Africa as well. So today, there still remains a small European population in South Africa that still reflects the old British and Dutch culture. The European population speaks mostly English and Afrikaans, which is a language derived from Dutch. The Afrikaans word braai comes from the Dutch word braden, which means to roast. However, the English-speaking South Africans, as well as the rest of the population, have also adopted this word and the activity of braaiing. The word braai or braaiing is the verb for this activity, and the noun for the equipment on which braaiing is done is the braai. The event is also called the braai. The meat cooked on the braai is known as braai meat. The English word for braai is barbecue. However, South Africans have certain requirements for a braai that differentiates a braai from a barbecue. A braai should be outdoors, made with wood and or charcoal, not gas, and should be done with simple braaiing equipment. The more fancy and shop-bought the braai appears, the more status it loses as a braai. South Africans love meat, so the braai meat should also include at least some of the following: spare ribs, lamb chops, pork chops, steak, chicken, pork sausages, sausaties, which are kebabs, fish, and boerewors, which is a South African beef sausage. Vegetables such as potatoes, onions, and mealies, which is corn on the cob, can be wrapped in foil and roasted in the coals. Cooking hamburger patties only on a braai is not considered braaiing. With the large choice of food for the braai and usually a lot of people to feed, braais tend to be big with lots of meat. When South Africans decide to braai, they will braai anywhere. And use any method necessary. Necessity is the mother of invention. And as I said, braais can be big, very big. The world is full of strange behavior. With a lot of people to feed. A braai is meant to be a long social event, often with lots of drinking. But I'm searching for a great heart to stand me by underneath. Because of this, braai broodjies, which are toasted sandwiches, and garlic bread, are first cooked as snacks on the braai to keep the guests going, as the braai food will probably only be eaten hours later. When South Africans braai, they do not eat the food immediately once it is cooked. Instead, all the food is stored in large containers as it comes off the braai. Sometimes these containers are put on the braai to keep them warm. Only once all food has been cooked do the guests then go and help themselves to the food and have one big meal. So often there is a group of very hungry people waiting for the signal that they can go and dish up their meal. Braaiing is such a fundamental part of South African culture that we have a National Braai Day on 24 September every year.
There's a whispering song of the wind in the grass. There's a rolling thunder across the savannah.
I emigrated to the Netherlands near the end of 2015, and being a born and bred South African, I soon started to miss a proper braai. So I decided to build one here. A new Dutch friend of mine, Patricia, was enlisted to help. We have both never laid a brick in our lives, so we decided to document the whole process of building this braai to help anyone who wants to build a braai or a barbecue. We decided to keep the design of the braai as simple as possible. We reviewed many braai designs before developing our design. We will now start going through the process of building our braai. After this, we will present our specific design and the material quantities and equipment we needed for it. You can use our design or come up with your own. This video should hopefully assist either way.
Sometimes there's so much you could show me.
Once the braai design is finalized, the braai building begins with the foundation. It is very important that the shape and dimensions of the foundation and braai are accurate. Not only must the length and breadth be accurate, but it is important that the braai is a true rectangle. In other words, that the angle of each corner is 90 degrees. If you mark out the foundation by only using the length and width, it is likely that you will not have a true rectangle. To ensure that we have a perfectly rectangular foundation and braai, we use the help of Pythagoras. In a perfect rectangle, the length of the rectangle squared plus the width of the rectangle squared equals the diagonal of the rectangle squared. If we put the length x of our braai and the width y of our braai into this equation, we can calculate the diagonal r for the perfect rectangle of our braai. This is how we put the theory into practice in marking out the corners of our foundation and braai. First, we marked out one side of the rectangle. In our case, this was the length x of the braai along the edge of an existing paved brick path. We then put a peg in the ground at a corner of this side. We then tied a string around this peg and ran a length of string out in parallel to the ground. We used the string to mark out an arc of radius y around the peg. We then put a peg in the ground at the other corner of our marked out side. Similarly, we tied a string around this peg and drew an arc with a radius of r around this peg. Where the two arcs cross each other is where the third corner of the braai would be. We then mirrored all the previous steps on our marked out side to determine the location of the fourth corner. These four corners made a perfect rectangle for our braai.
So here we started the foundation by digging the hole in which we will pour the concrete. The depth of the foundation should be at least 20 centimeters. To create a nice neat foundation, we are going to install shutterboards in which to pour the concrete. Because of this, the length and width of the whole duct must be the size of the foundation, plus the thickness of the shutterboards, plus about 2 centimeters additional gap to fill in some sand to give the shutterboards support.
Here we have installed the shutterboards. Obviously, the inner dimensions of the shutterboards match the dimensions of the foundation. The shutterboards are cheap wood planks from the hardware store, which we asked them to cut to the desired lengths. To make sure that the shape of the shutterboard enclosure is rigid and dimensionally accurate, we nailed the corners of the boards together. When getting the pieces of the shutterboards cut to length, ensure that the length of some of the boards overlap the other boards at the ends to enable nailing them together at the corners. The overlap should at least be the thickness of the shutterboard it is going to be nailed to. Ensure that when the shutterboards are installed in the ground, the top edges are at the surface level the foundation top surface is going to be at. This is so that when the concrete has been poured, you can level and smooth the concrete to the height of the shutterboards. To achieve this, the width of the shutterboards should be similar to the depth of the foundation. When installing the shutterboards, ensure that the corners are perfectly square, using the method for creating a perfect rectangle which we previously used, and make sure that the top edges of the shutterboards are all level, as this will dictate the shape and the level of the foundation. Once the installation of the shutterboards is final, fill the gaps between the shutterboards and the ground with sand to support the shutterboards. This is me enjoying playing in the dirt. I am busy compacting the sand so that the foundation will have a firm base. Now the concrete for the foundation can be mixed and poured. We bought concrete mix from the local hardware store. We calculated the volume of the foundation and bought the number of bags that matched this. We also bought one additional bag to account for wastage. Special mixing bits for a drill are available to mix the concrete with the water, but we found that mixing with this bit was not effective and the motor of the drill kept overheating. Therefore, we reverted to mixing the concrete by hand with a small gardening spade in a bucket. This was quite easy, and we don't think any other method is necessary. We poured the water in the bucket first, and one would mix with the spade, while the other slowly poured in the concrete mix. We at first followed the instructions by using the average of the range of the amount of water recommended. However, we found the concrete mix to be still too dry and unworkable. Our research showed that the recommended water should be suitable when the water is thoroughly mixed into the concrete. However, after lengthy thorough mixing, we still did not find this to be the case, and we added a little more water than recommended. After each bucket of concrete was mixed, we poured the bucket into the foundation hole. We poured the whole foundation in one work session, as we did not want parts of the foundation to dry before pouring in more. Once all the concrete is poured, one is supposed to use a vibrating tool, which you put into the concrete, to remove air pockets and to let the concrete settle. However, as we were trying to avoid buying or hiring any expensive equipment, we did not do this. Instead, we recommend using a spade to mix and compact the concrete in the foundation to remove air pockets and voids. This is not that effective, but better than nothing. Is this hard work? Is this hard work?
It's very hard work.
Put your back into it, woman.
Huh?
Put your back into it, woman.
Have a bad back, no.
The first summer's day in the Netherlands. En gefrikte dans.
Once all the concrete has been poured into the foundation, use a float to flatten and smooth the foundation surface to top edges of the shutterboards. We also used a long square wooden bar to do this. We placed this bar on the top edges of the shutterboards and dragged it over the surface of the concrete to level the concrete surface. Once finished, let the concrete dry for the time recommended by the concrete mix supplier. Once the foundation had set, we dug up the earth around the foundation and removed the shutterboards. We could now see that the foundation concrete has lots of voids in it. The air pockets had not been removed. This is because we did not use a vibrating tool or any other method to remove the air pockets from the poured concrete. Because this foundation will not be supporting heavy loads, the pockets did not concern us too much. But if we did this again, we would have tried to remove these pockets by compacting and mixing the poured concrete with a spade. We then filled in the earth around the foundation again. The foundation is now ready for laying off the bricks.
Sweeping the lawn.
Divided. Before we started actually laying the bricks with mortar, we laid a few dry layers of bricks to just double check that our calculations of the dimensions and brick positions were correct. Once confirmed, we removed these dry layers and started with the actual laying of the bricks.
And now we get to the fun part, laying the bricks. This is me laying the first brick. Notice that the Dutch weather lived up to its reputation. But this did not put us off, we worked through the rain. However, we do not recommend this, as the rain makes the mortar watery, making it difficult to lay the bricks straight and level. Laying the first layer of bricks must be done perfectly, as it will affect the rest of the layers. We marked out the outline of the first layer in chalk and measured the location of each brick before we began laying. The mortar was similar to the concrete. We needed to add more water than recommended. Even with this extra water, the mortar was stiff and difficult to work with. We had to force the bricks into position, and if it wasn't in the right position after a short while, we would have to remove the brick and mortar and start again. This is because the bricks quickly absorb the water out of the mortar, making the mortar stiff and hard. Because of this, we began to wet the bricks with water so they would not suck out the water from the mortar. From researching mortar for bricklaying, it should apparently be the consistency of butter, making the bricklaying easy. However, this mortar we used never came close to this consistency. Apparently, it is actually better to mix your own mortar with the simple ingredients of river sand, cement, water, and plasticizer. Apparently, dishwashing liquid can serve as a good plasticizer. This mix results in the butter-like consistency. The shop-bought mortar mix has additional ingredients such as lime, which makes it not so easy to work with. In addition, we found that after the braai had been standing for a while, the rain leaches out this lime, leaving white marks on the bricks. If we had to do this again, we would rather mix our own simple mortar. Determining the amount of mortar mix to buy for this braai was difficult. A rough calculation we found is 4 times 25 kilogram bags per meter squared of a single wall. However, we bought a few extra bags and ended up using it all due to wastage. Determining the number of bricks to buy was also difficult. A rough calculation we found is 60 bricks per meter squared of single wall. However, we bought about 10% extra bricks and used them all because some of the bricks had to be cut for the corners and edges of the braai. We cut the corner and edge bricks to size with a brick cutting chisel, but often the cut was not right and we had to do it again. Buying a small number of bricks for a small project such as this was not easy. At a normal hardware store, they only sell bricks by the pallet, and each brick pallet can have 2,000 bricks. So you may need to hunt around for a place that sells small quantities of bricks, or look on general sales websites such as Marktplaats in the Netherlands or Gumtree in South Africa for people selling small quantities. An important note: when the specifications of bricks for sale are listed, the dimensions given for the brick tend to include the expected thickness of the mortar joints around the brick. Therefore, the actual size of the brick is smaller than the dimensions listed. For our design, we preferred to know the actual dimensions of the bricks, so we asked the brick supplier for these actual dimensions.
So we continued with laying the first layer of bricks, and it rained some more, so we made a makeshift shelter to protect our work area. The thickness of the mortar joints were meant to be 10 mm for the entire braai, but because of the stiffness of the mortar, it ended up being between 13 and 15 mm. For each brick, lay a significant amount of mortar with a trowel. Also apply mortar to the one end of the brick. Once the brick is laid, tap the brick into the place with a trowel, handle or a mallet. The excess mortar that squeezes out can then be removed. For each brick we ensured that it was level with the spirit level. Throughout the bricklaying process we constantly used a spirit level to check the level of each brick and the walls. Remember to check the level in two directions. The directions square to each other. To check the levels of the walls and the levels of the walls in relation to each other, we laid the wooden square bar that we used to level the foundation across the tops of the walls and put the spirit level on this bar to check the level.
This is just a pic of me. I also wanted to be involved in the first layer. When laying the other brick layers, it is important that the walls are perfectly vertical. To ensure this, we first hammered square wooden posts into the ground in line with the walls of the braai. We then checked that these posts were perfectly vertical using a spirit level. We then marked the height of each brick layer on the posts.
We worked into the night as well, as we had set a date for a big Dutch family braai, my family, and we could not miss this deadline.
After marking the height of each brick layer on the posts, we then wrapped string around and between the posts, creating a string frame in which we could accurately lay the bricks. It is important that the string is pulled tight so that it does not sag between the posts. Once one brick layer was finished, we loosened the string, slid it up to the next level mark on the posts, tightened the string again, and laid the next brick layer. The string we used had a rough texture. This allowed us to just wrap the string tight around the posts to secure the string instead of having to tie and untie knots. The base of the braai is going to be a solid block. Instead of wasting bricks and effort building up this whole base with bricks, we decided to fill the base with compacted river sand and then cover this base with only one layer of bricks. To compact the river sand, we just stood on it a lot. To provide extra support for this layer of bricks, we added a few brick tower supports. The height of these towers also helped us to perfectly level the sand. In other words, the level of sand had to be exactly the same height as the top of the brick towers.
Another regular check of the levels of the walls and the levels of the walls in relation to each other. We laid the wooden square bar that we used to level the foundation across the tops of the walls and put the spirit level on this bar to check the level. This is a picture of the walls of the braai completed, and we are letting the mortar dry. To get the grooved visual effect between the bricks, we used a pointing trowel to scrape the mortar away between the bricks to create concave grooves. We did this for each brick layer, immediately after laying it, before the mortar had hardened. Bits of excess mortar on the surface of the walls dry quickly and is very difficult to clean it off one set, so we scrub the walls with water and a wire brush after each layer to remove the excess mortar before it sets.
This is the two of us greatly enjoying being dirty and being proud of our progress. Always cleaning.
Somebody has to be the joke.
Crazy dog. When braaiing, obviously a lot of heat is generated. Normal bricks and mortar will not be able to cope with this extreme heat. Therefore, we needed to line the braai with special fire-resistant bricks and mortar. In this picture, we have laid the floor lining of the braai with these fire-resistant bricks. The thickness of the mortar between the bricks is thinner, about 5 millimeters, as these fire-resistant bricks are smaller. We did not scrape grooves into the mortar of this lining because the gaps were small and a smooth surface will be easy to clean after braaiing.
Another picture of our work area.
After finishing the lining on the floor of the braai, we then installed the lining on the walls of the braai.
Lee taking a break and playing with the doggies.
You have probably been wondering where the supports for the braai grid are. We left them for last. We considered a few options for the grid supports. One involved putting segments of angle iron in the mortar as we laid the bricks of the wall. However, planning the brick positions to perfectly match the desired locations of the angle iron was too difficult. Similar methods could have been done more easily with strips of plate, but we wanted the supports to be robust and to not bend over time. Brick positioning would also have had to be planned, but not as much as with the angle iron option. Another support option considered, and that we have seen in other designs, is to rotate by 90 degrees inward a brick in each alternate brick layer of the side braai walls. This results in half the brick jutting out into the braai space. We did not choose this option because then you can only have support levels spaced apart by 2 brick layers, and we wanted to have closer spacing between the support layers so that we could have better control over the heat the braai meat is exposed to. Furthermore, because the braai is single, not double, wall design, rotating the bricks would ruin the even pattern of the laid bricks and make the aesthetics of the braai walls not so appealing. Instead of these options, we chose to simply drill holes in the braai walls and insert metal rods for the supports. We made sure we had drill bits that are specifically for masonry. Initially, we were concerned that the bricks and mortar would crumble and crack when we drilled, but this did not happen. To be careful, we first drilled small pilot holes to the full length and then used the correct size drill bit to enlarge the holes to the same size as the rod diameters. The cheap drill that we had been using kept on overheating during this drilling, so we switched to a more heavy-duty drill which worked fine. We also had to switch the drill to its hammer function to drill to the desired depth. This drilling is quite a noisy affair, and the neighbors still remember hearing us drilling at 2 a.m. in the morning. Because of the care and effort we put into designing and building this braai, we hope that it will last for a few hundred years, and as a result, we bought metal rods for the supports that will last at least 100 years. The metal rods are made out of 316L stainless steel. These high-quality material rods will literally stay shiny and not corrode through in 100 years. The supplier we bought these rods from cut the rods into the lengths that we wanted. 316L stainless steel is expensive, so you can get slightly cheaper rods made out of 304L stainless steel. Once the holes were drilled, we just slid these rods in. We did not bother to secure the rods in any way. They stay in position just fine.
And finally, after inserting the support rods, the braai is complete, except for the braai grid.
And here we put in the finishing touch, the braai grid. One can easily buy braai grids anywhere, but these grids come in standard sizes. We decided that we would rather design the braai to the size we wanted instead of designing the braai around the size of a standard braai grid. Therefore, we had to order a custom-made grid. Rather spend a little extra and get a robust stainless steel or chrome-coated grid so that it will last for a long time.
Two very dirty, very tired, but very proud braai builders.
Getting dirty provided endless fun. When working with concrete and mortar, wear old clothes or overalls. The concrete and mortar gets everywhere.
Me cleaning up the work area as usual.
It was now the morning of the big family braai. The braai has been cleaned with water using a high-pressure hose, and the fire starter wood has been placed. The braai is fired up for the first time. And what we did it all for? Braaiing! Note the South African flag and South African plakkies.
And me preparing for all the guests.
And the Dutch family has arrived and are busy scoffing the braai meat. Oh, and the Barbeques. Can't have a braai without them. And the family still scoffing. I had to braai for an army. Just an interesting fact. The Dutch don't like and do not eat lamb. It is very hard to find lamb in the shops. So, sadly, we had to have a lamb-free braai. And I couldn't have the Dutch family not knowing what springbokkies are. Springbokkies for all. Don't ask how many bottles of amarula and peppermint liqueur we went through.
The springbokkies were so popular that they are now had at every occasion.
There's so much you can show me.
But now, as promised, we are going to show you our braai design. This is a picture of the design drawing of our braai. It has 4 views: front view, side view, top view, and a cross-sectional view of the front view. These different views should give you all the information to build this braai. This is the front view of the braai. The structural bricks have been shaded grey so you can discern them from the fire bricks. This view shows the patterning of the structural bricks as well as the fire bricks. It also shows the vertical gap between the structural bricks. A cross-section of this front view can be seen in another picture to see the internals of the braai. This is the side view. It shows the patterning of the structural bricks on the side. The actual brick dimensions are also shown in this picture in a note. It is unlikely that you will find bricks of the exact same dimensions which we used. So whichever brick you use, you can adapt this drawing to match your chosen bricks. The same applies to the fire bricks. Once you have your design with the structural bricks, you can plan the layout of the fire bricks accordingly. The gaps between the fire bricks can be modified to try to ensure that the majority of the coverage with the fire bricks can be achieved with whole bricks, not cut to fit pieces. This is the top view of the braai. It shows the patterning of the structural bricks and the fire bricks. It also shows the horizontal gaps between the fire bricks and the structural bricks, and the gap between the vertical layer of fire bricks and the vertical structural bricks. The horizontal location of the supporting rods is also shown. And finally, this is the cross-sectional view. Here the details of the support rods and their vertical locations are shown. The horizontal and vertical gaps between the fire bricks are also shown. It can be seen that the void in the base of the braai is filled with dry, compacted river sand. A layer of structural bricks has been laid over this sand. The gaps around these bricks is also shown. And that is pretty much the end of the video. But before we finish, we would like to leave you with 2 parting clips. This is all the hard work that we did building this braai. This is the final result. We made it in June 2016. It is now March 2017 and we've used it so many times already, and as you can see, it's still standing. So I think our design is not too bad. I hope you can enjoy braaiing too, and good luck.
Hello! It's the 4th of March 2017. Look at this. We're having a braai. It's a bit chilly outside, but the fire here keeps us nice and warm. And we're going to eat later on. Here's the chicken. And here's some meat.
That needs a little bit of water, I think.
Yes, I think, shall I get
There's a
the
bowl
water?
there, there's a bowl there for water, there's a bowl, there's a bowl there.
Plum in the pot!
Yep, she found the water.
Oh, my South African friend taught me how to do this. So I hope I do it right. Oh, God. Oh, shit. Sorry for my... Oh!
Okay, that's on video.
That's on video, I'm sorry.
So say something Dutch to say goodbye.
Okay.
This is the end of our braai making video.
Oké, wij gaan dadelijk lekker eten, smakelijk eten en een fijne dag verder. Doeg!
Bye.
Bye.